So far, we have had a broad overview of the basic concepts of Indian philosophy, concepts such as darshana, kama, and moksha. We have had a glance of the philosophical green shoots in Vedas and Upanishads. We also learned a bit about the guys who market the Indian philosophers, the materialists. We are now going to take a plunge into the mainstream. Before doing so, I would like to explain to you a concept called Purva Paksha. Almost all schools of our philosophy follow an important methodology which is known as Purva Paksha Khandana, which means refutation of the prayer view, which was followed by Uttara Paksha, or the Siddhanta statement, or proof of the own position, that is subsequent view and conclusion. In other words, every darsana provides you with its own spectacles with which to view reality. Before accepting anything, it tells you the things to be rejected. Only then does what the darsana has get revealed and discussed. In fact, every bit of philosophical material, that is the sutras or the bhashyas, the vartikas and the vrittis, etc., go through this process of Purva Paksha Khandana and Uttara Paksha. The process has a great advantage. It has made them almost encyclopedic, at least for the topic under discussion. When a particular school takes up its case, it first enumerates all other schools opposed to it, or even slightly differing from it, and discuss their viewpoints in detail. This makes them self-correcting and continuously evolving in nature. Since every other school gets included in Purva Paksha, the points of departure gets automatically highlighted. Even a slightest variation in the mode of thought in the other schools gets explained. When this gets done, we get a complete picture of the other school as seen by the protagonists of the school indulging in Purva Paksha. It will not therefore be an exaggeration to say that every school of our philosophy evolved through this energetic ideological conflicts with its rivals. This is very, very important. So this, now that I have explained the Purva Paksha Khandana, what is Purva Paksha, now let us come to the Sankhya school of philosophy. The meaning of the term Sankhya is uncertain. Some people say it's numbers, but nobody is sure. Its origin is attributed to one Kapila, who remains obscure. That it is very ancient is not disputed by the scholars. Mahabharata, Sharaka Samhita, Manusmriti, and several other works are all saturated with the doctrine of Sankhya in the words of one historian. Mahabharata in fact calls it Sanatana. Only two actual works dealing with the Sankhya philosophy are available to us. One is, of course, the famous Sankhya Karika by Ishwara Krishna, written sometime in the 5th century BCE, because it got translated in Chinese in the 6th century BCE, so it must be around the 5th century BCE, containing 72 couplets, and the other is the Sankhya Sutra, supposedly written by the Kapila Muni himself. But this work is shown to have been written later than the 14th century. So this is what available as Sankhya, original Sankhya piece of literature. There are various commentaries, of course. There is a possibility that Sankhya was originally a purely materialist philosophy, as even its commentators like Vijnana Bhikshu, says that time has devoured Sankhya, leaving only a fragment behind. Therefore, scholars like Chattopadhyaya think that the original materialist core had later been embellished with an idealist exterior. Now let us consider Sankhya in some detail. Sankhya, of course, as I said earlier in my last speech, it accepts three sources of valid knowledge, that is perception, inference and testimony. Okay, then there's pratyaksha and anumana and sabda. These three things they accept. The first premise of Sankhya is the fact of suffering. It's like the Buddha's, all these things. It's a fact of suffering. It agrees that cutting the root of rebirth is the only way to emancipation from suffering. How to achieve this is the aim of this school. There are two primary entities exist as per the Sankhya school. Please listen to me very carefully. Two primary entities. One is called Prakriti, the other is called Purusha. Prakriti is nature, Purusha is person or persons. The nature is singular and persons are numerous. As per Sankhya philosophy, both are eternal and independent of each other. We of course met Purusha while discussing the Purusha Sukta of Rigveda, when the gods cut up Purusha in a world creating sacrifice. That Purusha of course looked like a human being complete with body. The Sankhya Purusha, however, is something more abstract. According to this Sankhya system, creation comes about by a conjunction of these two categories. That is, Prakriti, though unconscious, is purposeful. Purusha, on the other hand, is pure consciousness but is inactive. It's very important. Prakriti is unconscious and it is purposeful and dynamic. I will keep on repeating it again and again so that it enters into you. And Purusha, on the other hand, is pure consciousness but is inactive. It transmigrates after death to another body. An escape of this endless cycle is possible only through the realization of the fundamental difference between Prakriti and Purusha, whereby the individual Purusha loses interest in Prakriti and is thereby liberated forever from all bodies, whatever that is subtle body or our physical body. Let me repeat, Purusha is conscious, unchangeable and inactive, while Prakriti is unconscious, forever changing and active. Prakriti is subservient to the ends of Purusha. The chain of evolution begins when Purusha impinges on Prakriti. The example given is just like a magnet attracts shavings of iron. Is like that. No? That's how Purusha attracts Prakriti. Okay, the Purusha, which before was pure without any object, becomes focused on Prakriti. And out of this is evolved Buddhi, which is also called Mahat. Buddhi means, of course, intellect or spiritual awareness, whatever you call, which is also called Mahat. After this, next to evolve is the individualized ego consciousness, which is called ahankara. We all know what I consciousness, I am. No, there is ahankara. So first is mahat or buddhi, then the second is ahankara, okay, which imposes upon Purusha the misapprehension that ego is the basis of Purusha's objectives existence. The ahankara further divides into 5 gross elements. You know, the Panchabhuta: space, air, fire, water, earth, and 5 fine elements, which is the sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, and then 5 organs of perception with which to hear, to touch, see, taste, and smell. I am not. Then again, 5 organs of activity with which to speak, grasp, move, procreate, and evaluate. Which means that is, we get eyes, ears, nose, and all these things, and then you have, speaking and holding this thing, moving legs, and then procreation, and then evacuate. These are the 5 things, the 5 things which are the organs of activity. And finally, manas, that is mind, which coordinates all these sense impressions. That is called manas. The Sankhya philosophy says the universe is the result of the combinations and permutations of these various principles to which the Purusha is added. Okay. Now I will again tell you, there are 5 gross elements, which is space, air, fire, water, and earth, and 5 fine elements, which is sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. Okay. And then 5 organs of perception. You know that, we are hearing and touching and seeing and tasting and smelling. With the nose we smell, with the mouth we taste, with the eyes we see, with the hand we touch, with the skin we touch, and with the ears we hear. And then the 5 organs of activity. When we speak, we move our mouth. That is our throat. That is a speech. Okay. Then with the hand we grasp, with the legs our move, with our sexual organs we procreate, and with our excretory organs we evacuate. Okay, the coordination of all these things is mind. The ahankara, now what happens? Largely outside this system, all this system, we got 3 primal quantities of matter that are called gunas. The first is tamas, that is darkness, which is obscurity, ignorance, and inertia. The second is rajas, that is passion, which is energy, emotion, expansiveness. And the third one is, of course, sattva, that is sattva guna, rajasa guna, and tamasa guna. So sattva is goodness, okay, which is illumination, knowledge, and lightness. And all these things, there is above this, this is very, very confusing, this philosophy. Above this, there is a principle of Tanmantra, which says, the Tanmantra means subtle, I will not, this already is complicated, I will not make it more complicated. I will tell you only one example. What it says is, let us say, sparsha, if you touch something. The origin of air element is the Tanmantra of touch called sparsha. The sparsha Tanmantra is the primordial unmanifested form of touch. What it says is, I'll tell you in a simple thing, the philosophy says, if you touch something, it's a physical activity. Okay. But there is a subtle form of that activity, that physical activity. Okay. That is not known to you. That is not manifest before you. That's not known to you. That is primordial. That quality, that is sparsha. That quality is sparsha. Okay. So what in simple words, what Sankhya philosophy does is, for every physical thing, there is a subtle thing behind that. That's what Sankhya philosophy is trying to do. What we do is, everything material, we say for everything material, it says no, everything is material, but there's something behind that material. There's an essence of that materialism. There's an essence of touch. There's an essence of sight. There's an essence of smell. This is what the Sankhya philosophy is trying to tell you. I will again explain. There are two things, Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is inactive but conscious. Prakriti is active and dynamic. And it has so many things. I said 5 senses and all those things I said. And there is a Tanmantra is there, which is the essence of everything. Okay, that's all. These are the simple things you should keep in mind. So, Purusha, what it does is, it adds consciousness to this entire mix, the entire mix of all these elements and things like this, and makes it more interesting. But though it is our philosophy is, though it is making it very interesting, it is only a mere witness to the intellectual processes. According to one simile, the Purusha is the lord of the house. The gunas, that is the sattva, the tamasa and sattva, the other one, what is it? Rajasa guna. They are the gatekeepers, and the senses are the doors. Okay? Though Purusha is not endowed with the creative might, Prakriti, which produces the universe, is able to perform on account of his union with Purusha. There is another example, another fine example which is given, which says that Prakriti is blind, but with the guidance of Purusha, it produces the manifold world. The union of these two is compared to a lame man of good vision mounted on the shoulders of a blind man with sure foot. See, there is another thing called causality. In the Western tradition, causality is typically regarded as relation between two events. That is, one is the cause of the other. But in the Indian tradition, it rather consists of the origin of a thing. Indian causality is the origin of a thing. The standard example of the causal relationship is that of a potter making a pot from clay, where the cause par excellence is taken to be the clay. Okay, the Sankhya analysis of the causation is called Satkaryavada, which means literally existing effort philosophy. Okay, the theory states in a very simple words that there is absolutely nothing new in anything in the world, in the product. Everything is determined by its causes. Okay, what it says is, there are 5 considerations it says. A non-existent thing cannot produce anything. Okay, if something is non-existent, it will remain non-existent, it cannot produce anything. When producing a specific thing, we always need a specific substance as a material cause. That is, only clay can produce pot. Milk cannot produce pot. The same way, milk can produce curd, but clay cannot produce curd. Okay, you need a specific substance for a specific material cause. This is example given by them. It says otherwise everything would come into being from everything. That is, if you accept that, if you accept the other type of the opposite logic, you can produce pot from milk or curd from clay or anything. That's what the logic says. So you require a specific substance for a material cause. You require a specific substance that is fixed. Okay, and a potter cannot make jewelry. That's what it says. So the effect is essentially identical with its material cause, so it has many of its qualities. It says a pot is still clay. It has the qualities of clay. The same way, curd has the qualities of milk. This argument is utilized to determine the basic attributes of, the imperceptible metaphysical cause of the empirical world. What it says is, yes, there is a world. This world is there. It is physical. But there is a cause which is not known to you. That is the original cause. You don't see clay in pot actually. Okay. But you are aware that the clay is, without clay you can't make a pot. The clay doesn't appear immediately. Clay is not manifest in pot. But the same way there is something which is unmanifest in all physical attributes of this world. This is what it says. Okay. So that is Prakriti. That's what it says. Purusha is pure consciousness, as I said again. As an immaterial soul, Purusha is not known through direct perception. You can't see Purusha. But the Sankhya philosophy gives 5 arguments to prove its existence. It says, all complex structures serve an external purpose. For instance, a bed is for something to lie on. Okay. So you will not have a complex, system unless there is an external purpose. That is the premise the Sankhya system makes. Okay. And it says the coordinated activities of body prove that there is something supervising. Without it, the body would fall apart. Okay. When someone dies, the body doesn't function, It just simply falls apart. So there is some Purusha which exists, which coordinates the entire thing. Although we cannot perceive ourselves as Purushas with the senses, we have immediate awareness of ourselves as conscious beings. The I, the Ahankara, I is there, that is there. The enjoyer, the experience itself is Purusha. You are enjoying things, so you are Purusha. So the final one it says is, liberation or the separation of soul and matter would be impossible without there being separate Purusha to be liberated. So Purusha must exist. This is the logic given by our Sankhya philosophy. When you analyze this, it is obvious that these arguments are weak and they will fail even ordinary logic. If Purusha is really inactive, it cannot supervise anything and cannot be the source of individual actions. And if Purusha has no gunas, you can't distinguish one Purusha from the other. But Sankhya system says there are millions and millions of Purushas. Okay. Yeah, but the Ishwar Krishna's Sankhya Karika, some scholars say Sankhya Karika really doesn't say that. What it says is, when it says akriya, that is without activity, it means only inability to move in space or to have mechanical effect. This is what some scholars say, but many scholars say that no, it doesn't have, it is akriya, it just sits there and watches things. Purusha just sits there and watches things. This is what Sankhya philosophy says. And what about this world? In Sankhya system, the world is neither real nor unreal. It is not unreal. The commentary says it's not unreal. Like a man's horn is not real. Okay, you don't have men do not have horns. The same way you can't say that the world is unreal. The world is not unreal. It is not real. How does it say it's not real? Because it passes away. The world passes away. Let me again. I will repeat this. The world is not unreal. Like a man's horn is unreal. Okay, man doesn't have a horn. You say that, so immediately you say that if someone says a man has a horn, you say it's unreal. But the world is there, you see the world is functioning, so it is real. That's what Sankhya says. But at the same time, the same world passes away after some time. decays, it gets into another, into another world. So in that sense, it is not real. It is not, however, to be regarded as indescribable, since such a thing cannot exist. The Sankhya, in fact, repudiates the view that regards world as a mere idea. The world exists in its eternal form of Prakriti and passes away in its transitory, manifestations. The world as a phenomenal reality as undergoing transformations. In simple words, it says, yes, the same world doesn't exist every time. Okay, it keeps on changing. So you can't say that this is the world, you can't fix it and this is the world. But the world now at this moment is not the world in the next moment. In that sense, it's not real. Also, it is not unreal because you see this, that something is existing. It keeps changing. That thing is real. That is the action of Prakriti and Purusha mixing together. This is real. That's what the Sankhya philosophy says. The cosmic process, it says, is twofold in character. It is creative as well as destructive. Creation is the unfolding of the different orders of the original Prakriti, and destruction is the dissolution of them into the original Prakriti. As a result of the distribution of the condition of equilibrium, the universe is evolved into different elements. And at the close of the world period, the products return by a reverse movement into the preceding stage of development. See, I will take, this is, this is slightly complicated. I will explain with a simple example. See, when you see a David Attenborough's film of, let us say, a shoot emerging from the earth. Okay. What you see is, when you see it in slow motion, shoot comes out of the earth and it grows. Okay. This is Prakriti and Purusha operating and it grows. It's very simple. It is growing. Okay. Now, you put the video on the rewind mode. When you put the video on rewind mode slowly, again it goes down. And at the original level, it becomes what it was earlier. Okay. There's only earth. There's no shoot. Okay. Sankhya philosophy in simple terms says that Prakriti and Purusha keeps on doing this. It grows and again it goes back. And again it grows, it goes back. This is how the cycle is functioning. So, Prakriti remains in condition. So, for the next development, the new universe. That is, you are winding it, rewinding it. Winding it, rewinding it. It's like what you do to a video. The same thing is happening in the Sankhya system. Because Prakriti is essentially changing, nothing is constant in the material world. Everything decays and meets its dissection in the end. Therefore, as long as the transmigrating entity persists, the suffering of old age and death is inevitable. The philosophy says the only way to fight suffering is to leave the circle of samsara, that is transmigration, forever. This is the liberation of Purusha. In Sankhya, it is normally called Kaivalya, the isolation. Completely you isolate from them. It comes through loosening the bond between Purusha and Prakriti. Okay. As I said, the bond is produced by the curiosity of the soul, because like the iron file getting attracted towards iron. Okay. And it's extremely strong because our Ahankara identifies ourselves with our present empirical state. Okay. So although Purusha is not actually bound by any external force, it is an enchanted observer that cannot take his eyes off the performance. Whatever is the world is being, performing, it cannot, takes his eyes off the performer. Okay, that's what it says. So, if you want to get away from this, the Sankhya philosophy says, you will have to move step by step. That is, you should, starting from the lowest of the material elements and gradually reaching to the the buddhi itself. You will have to say that this is not me, it is not mine, I am not this, the nose is not this, the sense is not this, taste is not mine. You will have to say this. And finally you will have to say the buddhi, your intellect is not also not yours. Once when this has been fully internalized with regard to all forms of Prakriti, starting from the lowest till the uppermost, then arises the absolute pure knowledge of the metaphysical solitude of Purusha. It is Kevala, it is alone. Purusha stands alone, it is not attached with Prakriti. Okay, it is pure consciousness. Okay, then you will get out of this samsara, this cycle of life and death. That's what Sankhya philosophy says. Okay. And as a dancer having performed stops dancing, so does Prakriti cease to perform for an individual Purusha when his task is accomplished. Okay. Prakriti always acts for the Purusha, and if he is not interested in her, I have seen her, if it's I have seen her enough, if Purusha says Prakriti stops for her, she is also not interested. She says, I have already been seen enough. That's what she says. The male principle is Purusha, the female principle is Prakriti. Okay, this is simple. Okay, this is exactly what the Sankhya philosophy is. Now, does Sankhya believe in God? Okay, this question, it answers by way of this logic. Okay, what it says is all actions we do are motivated by either self-interest or benevolence or trying to help someone. Okay, let us say God is is interested in himself. God who has all his interest. See, he is a God because all his interest is fulfilled. So he cannot have any selfish interest. If God is affected by selfish motives that decide, he is not free. Okay. If he is free, then he would not involve himself in the act of creation. Okay. To say that God is neither free nor shackled is to remove all basis of argument. The creation of the world cannot be considered as an act of kindness. If someone says that God is kind, that's why he has created the world, the Sankhya philosophy very clearly says that the creation of the world cannot be regarded as an act of kindness, since the souls prior to creation have no pain from which they are required to be released. Okay. So what is the kindness that God has bestowed on the souls? By creating this world and by inflicting suffering, by imposing suffering on the people. That's what the philosophy asks. Okay. If God were moved by goodwill, he would not have created only, he would have created only happy creatures. The world is certainly not full of happy creatures. In fact, it's the other way around. Okay. So, if it is said that the difference of conduct required God to deal with men according to these differences, that is, some behave, in a good manner, some behave in a bad manner. So God is required. The law of karma is operative here. The aid of God is not necessary. Okay. If you say that your past actions will revisit you and you will have to suffer, then you don't require a God. That action itself will take care of that. That's what the philosophy says. Okay. And again, Sankhya philosophy says, material thing cannot issue from an immaterial spirit. Okay. The eternal existence of Purusha is inconsistent with the infinity and creatorship of God. When Sankhya philosophy says Purusha is eternal, Purushas are eternal, and Prakriti is eternal, okay, and it doesn't require a creatorship of God. Okay. So God is not essential to Sankhya philosophy. Okay. But at the same time, the Sankhya is not atheistic in the sense that that is established there is no God. It doesn't establish that there is no God. It only shows that there is no reason for supposing there is one. It doesn't take the trouble of establishing that there is no God. No, it doesn't say that. Okay, that we should keep in mind. Okay, now I have come to the end of explaining the Sankhya philosophy. Now let us shift to yoga. The Yoga Sutra is ascribed to Patanjali, which is also the name of a great grammarian who wrote a commentary on Panini. Okay, the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali most probably lived sometime in the 5th century CE. Okay, the other Patanjali, of course, lived in the 2nd century of BCE. So there is no connection between these two things. Okay. Strictly speaking, yoga by itself is not a philosophical view at all. It means certain practices that had come down from a great antiquity and were thought to give the practitioner some supernatural powers. Later on, it became a philosophy. The Yoga Sutra, however, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, however, discusses certain philosophical issues as well as yoga practices, without, however, establishing an inherent connection between these two. Okay. In Patanjali, yoga doesn't mean, normally yoga, some yoga means union. Here, yoga is separation. Yoga, if you do yoga for the separation of Purusha and Prakriti, that is very, very important. Okay. So, yoga is a methodical effort to attain perfection through the control of the different elements of human nature, physical and psychical. The physical body, the active will and the understanding of mind are supposed to be brought under control. Patanjali insists on certain practices which are intended to cure the body of its restlessness and free it from its impurities. When we secure through these practices increased vitality, prolonged youth and longevity, these are to be employed in the interest of spiritual freedom. Okay. The main interest, I must say, of Patanjali is not theorizing, but the practical motive of indicating how salvation can be attained by disciplined activities. What are these disciplined activities? There are 8 activities. Ashtanga Yoga, which is Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana or Samadhi. Yama means restraint. One must turn to ethics by refraining himself from immoral activities. This is the first step towards self-discipline. Niyama means observance. It refers to cultivation of values and virtues in life. These two angas, that is Yama and Niyama, protects us from irresistible temptation and desires and offer a protection from distraction. Okay. The next 2 steps, that is Asana and Pranayama, prepares the physical body for the yogi practice. Asana means all of us know what asana is. Okay. A steady but comfortable posture is essential for yoga. And pranayama, of course, is control of our breath. So both these angas, they enhance the steadiness of the body and mind. The pratyahara is concerned with the withdrawal of senses. The senses, by their inherent nature, yoga says, remain focused on the external world. So you will have to withdraw yourself from the objects of the external world. The isolation from the world, isolation from the world objects facilitates the concentration of mind on any particular object. The final 3 steps in yoga are dharana, that is concentration, dhyana and samadhi. Dharana concerned with the concentration. It is concerned with the concentrating the mind. That is the chitta. That's called I will come to it later. What chitta is in yoga. That is on a single subject. And the subject is you are focusing on a single subject. Your mind diverts to another subject, it has to be again fixed again on the chosen subject of concentration. Dhyana means, contemplation. Okay, in this stage, we keep the mind steady on the object chosen for contemplation. The mind is focused without interruptions, and there is an unidirectional flow of chitta. Okay, though the mind is steadfast, yet there is awareness of the mind of the self. You know that there is an observer and there is also one thing that is being observed. These two things we know. We can concentrate on God, Ishvara, we can concentrate on anything, okay. But He is there and we are sitting here. No? There is only one object will be there. And finally, Samadhi is the ultimate stage of yogic practice. Now all self-awareness of mind disappears. The seeker, that is, we become aware of our attachment to Prakriti was owing to our ignorance, that is avidya, our ignorance, the illusion is gone. This is the ultimate Nirbij Samadhi. Okay, once you know that we have absolutely nothing to do with the Prakriti, we are pure conscious, we are pure consciousness, that is the final, stage of the yoga practice. Now let us come to the philosophy part. Yoga philosophy is nothing but Sankhya with some slight variations. All his principles, 25 principles are accepted by yoga. Of course, he doesn't argue about them, he just lists the principles, okay. The universe is, again it says, universe is uncreated and eternal. It undergoes changes, okay. And in that state is called Prakriti, and again it's attached with gunas, it is always the same. And yoga also says that there are countless individual souls which animate living beings and are by nature pure, eternal and immutable. But through the association with the universe, they become indirectly the experience of joys and sorrows and assume innumerable embodied forms in the course of samsara, that is the cycle of life and death. Regarding the development of Prakriti, however, yoga holds that the yoga system, noted down somewhere, the yoga system holds that there are two parallel lines of evolution, starting from buddhi, which on the other side develops into ahankara, manas, and the five senses of cognition, five senses of action and everything. Yoga, in fact, brings the three internal organs of Sankhya under Chitta. That is Siddha. Siddha means it doesn't recognize ahankara and manas as separate from buddhi. There's only one thing which is, that is Siddha. There's only one thing which is Siddha, there's only one thing which is there. Okay. Yoga system says that ignorance, avidya, ignorance of the true things, nature of things causes desires, and which are the base of pain and suffering in the world. The question of origin of ignorance is meaningless in view of the beginningless of the world. So, the yoga accounts for creation by two agencies. One is God, the other is ignorance, avidya. So, avidya is in fact a sort of a Saturn. So, through the force of the latter, the ever revolving energy of Prakriti transforms into manifestations as the mental and material world, while God, though remaining outside the pale of Prakriti, removes the obstructions offered by the latter. See, the thing is, the difference between Sankhya and yoga is only one. Yoga introduces God and it says that God helps you in removing the obstructions created by Prakriti, the ignorance and everything. God helps you. This is what the Sankhya, the yoga philosophy says. Okay. So, while Sankhya is busy with logical investigations, yoga discusses the nature of devotional exercises and mental discipline. So what it says is Sankhya is Sankhya is in fact called Nirishwara Sankhya and yoga is called Sheshwara Sankhya. The aim of yoga is to free the individual from the clutches of matter. The highest form of matter is Siddha, and the yoga lays down the course by which a man can free himself from the fetters of Siddha. By withdrawing the Siddha from the natural functions, you overcome the pain of the world and escape the samsara. God is important in the yoga system because God helps Purusha along all through the course. Let me summarize. It's quite complicated. Let me summarize in a very simple way. See, Sankhya is a sort of dualistic realism. Let me summarize in a few words. Sankhya is a sort of dualistic realism. It is dualistic because it advocates two ultimate realities. One is Prakriti, the other is Purusha. Sankhya is realism as it considers that both matter and spirit are equally real. Sankhya is pluralistic also because of his teaching that Purusha is not one but many. Purusha is a self. Purusha is consciousness, which I said again. Purusha is neither produced nor does it produce. Prakriti too is uncast. It is eternal. Prakriti is also not produced, but it has an inherent tendency to produce. Prakriti is the material cause of the world. Unlike Purusha, Prakriti is dynamic. A cause has to be active and changing. Sankhya regards ignorance as the root cause of bondage and suffering. So according to Sankhya, the self is eternal pure conscience. Due to ignorance, self identifies itself with the physical body and is consumes manas, ahankara and mahat, which are products of Prakriti. So once the self becomes free of this false identification and the material bonds, the salvation is possible. So the Sankhya uses three terms, that is Mahat, Buddhi, Ahankara and Manas. Yoga is only one use, that is Chitta, that is mind. Okay, that's the only thing. It is considered as being composed of intellect, ego and mind. Patanjali shows the way to emancipation by Ashtanga Yoga. Both yoga and Sankhya hold that there are many Purushas. Sankhya argues that if God exists and if God is eternal and unchanging as widely claimed, then He cannot be the cause of the world. So Sankhya doesn't accept God. Unlike Sankhya, Yoga holds that there is a Supreme Purusha, that is God, who is above all Purushas, and that no other Purusha can be like the Supreme Purusha. The Supreme Purusha does not create the Prakriti or other Purushas, but he helps Purusha to attain liberation. I think I have come to the end of my session. It is quite a tough session, I agree, but you will have to bear with this.